Welcome to this explainer. I am so glad you're here because today we are unpacking a massive shift in the world of higher education. Recently, the Department of Education dropped an 86-page federal rule implementing the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, or WFTCA of 2025. And you guys, this rule fundamentally changes how the government evaluates the worth of a college degree. Whether you're a prospective student, a taxpayer, or just someone fascinated by how policy shapes our future, this directly impacts you. We're going to look closely at the data, the exact regulatory text, and the intense debate it sparked. Okay, let's dive right into this. It's kind of the ultimate question, isn't it? For decades, society has pushed higher education as the absolute gold standard for financial security. But does it always actually pay off? The government is now stepping in and basically saying, we are going to measure this for sure. After all, the federal government heavily subsidizes these programs with taxpayer dollars through student loans and grants. They're treating this like a serious investment, and they want to see the returns. Here is exactly how we'll break this down. First, a new accountability era. Second, the earnings premium explained. Third, public pushback and concerns. Fourth, exemptions and final compromises. And finally, the bottom line for students. All right, part one, a new accountability era, shifting the baseline of higher education. We are seeing a total philosophical shift in Washington right now. Under the old rules, from regulations passed way back in 2023, the government primarily looked at a debt-to-earnings metric. Basically, did your student loan debt completely dwarf your paycheck? But under the new Working Families Tax Cuts Act, they've scrapped that entirely. The new rule introduces the earnings premium measure. This new framework purely measures if graduates make more money than working adults in their state who didn't attend the program, people with just a high school diploma or a bachelor's degree. It's a test of pure financial value add. And this regulatory shift is moving at lightning speed. I mean, the WFCTA was signed into law on July 4th, 2025. The Department of Education had to completely scramble to get the proposed rule published by April 2026. Because of strict statutory deadlines, parts of this actually go into effect immediately in July 2026, with the whole shebang fully locked in by July 2027. Moving right along to Section 2, the Earnings Premium Explained, the mechanics of the rulebook. So what exactly is it? Here is the exact definition straight from the source text. The earnings premium is a measure comparing the median earnings of a program's graduates to the earnings of working adults with only a high school diploma or bachelor's degree. It really is that simple. The Department of Education takes the statutory term gainful employment and interprets it literally to mean profitable. Their stance is that the median student absolutely must earn a premium over what they would have made if they never even enrolled. But what happens if a program doesn't deliver that premium? Well, there's a very specific timeline for the penalty. Step 1. The program fails the earnings test for a given year. Now, the government doesn't shut down funding immediately. They wait for Step 2. If the program fails again, specifically failing 2 out of any 3 consecutive years, it triggers Step 3. And Step 3 is the big one. The program completely loses its eligibility to offer students federal direct loans. Actually, it gets even heavier than that. The department introduced a severe institutional penalty hidden in the legal jargon under something called administrative capability. If over 50% of an institution's federal funds and students are wrapped up in these failing, low-earning programs, the entire school risks provisional status. Think about that for a second. An entire college could literally lose its federal funding if too many of its individual programs bomb this test. Which brings us to Section 3, Public Pushback and Concerns. The great debate over value. As you might imagine, people had thoughts. When the proposed rule was published, the Department of Education was hit with 9,994 public comments. Students, parents, college administrators, small business owners, they all flooded the agency with feedback. The pushback was fierce, and it came largely from specific sectors of the educational landscape that felt deeply targeted by an earnings-only test. And when you look at the department's own data analysis, you can totally see why. Programs in business, management, health, and vocational tech have very low estimated fail rates under this rule. But bachelor's degrees in fine arts or religious studies, they have incredibly high estimated fail rates. The data paints a really clear picture here. Certain fields are disproportionately impacted when you measure success purely by a post-graduation paycheck. At the heart of this entire debate is a massive philosophical clash. On one side, the Department of Education states very simply, gainful means profitable. They are looking strictly at the financial return on investment. On the flip side, public commenters passionately argued that education provides social returns way beyond just earnings. They argued that fields like early childhood education, social work, fine arts, and ministry provide immense societal value, even if they don't produce high salaries right out the gate. One of the absolute loudest voices in the comments came from the cosmetology and beauty sector. They pointed to the government's own projections, showing a staggering 93% fail rate for their programs under the proposed rules. They feared this would cause massive workforce shortages for local salons and small businesses. Now, the department did counter this by noting that a massive percentage of cosmetology programs, up to 86% in some states, actually operate completely outside of the federal student loan system already, meaning they wouldn't even be affected by this rule. All right, Section 4. Exemptions and final compromises. Finding regulatory middle ground. To their credit, the Department of Education did listen, and they carved out highly specific exemptions based on that feedback. For tipped professions like cosmetology or massage therapy, where income is famously underreported to the IRS, the department agreed to delay accountability if the earnings data is from 2025 or prior. For special education, commenters pointed out the documented wage gap for disabled workers, so the government granted a full exemption for programs at schools exclusively serving students with autism or specific learning disabilities. Finally, for religious and arts programs terrified of losing all federal funding, the department created a very specific loophole. Let's look a little closer at that last one. I like to call it the Pell Grant preservation fix. If a low-earning program, say a theology degree, knows it's going to fail the earnings test, the institution can voluntarily agree to just stop putting its students into direct loan debt for at least 5 years. And the trade-off? The government will allow those programs to keep receiving federal Pell Grants. This is a crucial compromise. It basically allows low-paying, high social value programs to survive as long as they stop trapping their students in federal debt. There were a few other final flexibilities thrown into the rulebook, too. To protect currently enrolled students, schools get a 3-year extension to conduct an orderly program closure if they fail. They also shifted the earnings measurement back to the 4th tax year after graduation instead of the 3rd, just giving students a little more time to establish their careers. And importantly, they excluded non-working graduates from the calculation to ensure programs weren't unfairly punished by weird economic anomalies, like the massive unemployment we all saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, Section 5, the bottom line for students. What happens next? Okay, this macroeconomic number is honestly surprising. $8.8 billion. That is the amount that federal Pell Grants are actually expected to increase over the next 10 years as a direct result of this regulation. You'd probably assume a strict accountability rule would just cut funding across the board, right? But the macroeconomic reality is that as these low-earning programs lose eligibility, the students don't just vanish. They shift their enrollment into better-performing, higher-earning programs that actually retain their eligibility. The rule also rolls out STATS, the Student Tuition and Transparency System. Colleges are now legally required to report their actual tuition fees and the typical grants they award right to the Department of Education. This translates into massive everyday transparency. Prospective students will now have the ultimate database to compare the true net cost of different programs before they sign their life away on a loan document. So the crucial takeaway here is this: the direct impact on you is immense. Before you ever enroll in a failing program, the school is required to give you a formal warning. You are being actively protected from low-earning debt traps. You'll receive crystal-clear data on your lifetime Pell Grant limits. Ultimately, this 86-page rule does one major thing. It shifts the financial risk away from the student and the taxpayer and puts it squarely back onto the shoulders of the schools themselves. They have to prove their worth. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought, a real question that this entire regulatory battle forces us to ask ourselves. Should the ultimate value of a higher education be measured strictly by your income or by your impact? The government has clearly made its choice for the sake of taxpayer loans, but what do you think? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating topic. And as always, keep learning.